Parakramabahu I was king of the Kingdom of Polonnaruwa from 1153 to 86. During his reign from the capital city of Polonnaruwa, he unified the three lesser kingdoms of the island, becoming one of the last monarchs in Sri Lankan history to do so. He oversaw the expansion and beautification of his capital, constructed extensive irrigation systems, reorganized the country's army, reformed Buddhist practices, encouraged the arts and undertook military campaigns in South India and Burma. The adage, "Not even a little water that comes from the rain must flow into the ocean without being made useful to man," is one of his most famous utterances. Parakramabahu spent much of his youth in the courts of his uncles Kitty Sri Mega, Prince of Dakanadza, and Sri Vallabha, Prince of Ruhuna respectively, as well as in the court of the king of Rajarata, Gajbahu II. He succeeded his uncle Kitty as king of Dakanadza around 1140 and over the next decade improved both Dakanadza's infrastructure and military. Following a protracted civil war, he secured power over the entire island around 1153 and remained in this position until his death in 1186. During Parakramabahu's reign, he launched a punitive campaign against the kings of Burma, aided the Pandyan dynasty against the Chola dynasty in southern India, and maintained extensive trade relations with China and countries in the Middle East. Within the island, he consecrated religious monuments, built hospitals, social welfare units, canals and large reservoirs, such as the Sea of Parakrama. Background: early, the island of Sri Lanka was in part dominated by the powerful Chola polity of South India. Following Rajaraja Chola I's invasion of Sri Lanka in 993, these regions remained under Chola control until the reign of Vijayabahu I. Vijayabahu I successfully drove the Chola invaders out at the beginning of his reign and shifted the capital of Rajarata from Anuradhapura to a planned city, Polonnaruwa. By the reign of Vikramabahu I, the island was divided into three kingdoms: Rajarata, Dakanadza, and Ruhuna. Vikramabahu was however regarded as the greatest in dignity as he possessed Rajarata with its sites of religious and historical importance. However, Manabharana, king of Dakanadza, and his brothers Sri Vallabha and Kitty Sri Mega, the joint kings of Ruhuna, were formidable rivals for the crown. Furthermore, all three were the descendants of Vijayabahu's sister, and thus had a strong claim to the throne. They are referred to in the Kulavamsa as the Arya branch of the royal dynasty, whilst Vikramabahu I is of the Kalinga branch. Birth: according to the ancient chronicle Kulavamsa, Parakramabahu's birth was predicted by a figure akin to a god seen in a dream by his father, King Manabharana of Dakanadza. A son was duly born to Manabharana's wife Ratnavali, and was named Parakramabahu because of his foe-crushing arms. Though the year of his birth cannot be known exactly confirmed, it is generally thought to be around 1123. The location would almost certainly have been the capital of Dakanadza, Punkagama. Upon being informed of the child's birth, Vikramabahu I in Polonnaruwa ordered that the boy be brought up as the heir to his throne. This kind of adoption may have been an olive branch of sorts on the part of Vikramabahu, who wished to keep the throne until his death, after which it would be passed on to Parakramabahu. Manabharana, however, rejected the offer, stating that it is not to send away such a jewel over son. He also speculated that, if the boy is taken thither, the party of Vikramabahu will gleam with mighty, upshooting flames, but our misfortune, alas so great, will become still worse. The schism that existed between the royal clans of Sri Lanka was too deep to allow for this manner of accommodation. Soon after the child's birth, Manabharana fell ill and died. His younger brother Kitty Sri Mega, who was joint king of Ruhuna, Ruhuna ascended the throne of Dakinadesa, while Srivallabha was declared sole king of Ruhuna. Parakramabahu, his mother Ratnavali and his two sisters Mita and Pabhavati, were sent to live in Mahangahula, the capital of Ruhuna, under the care of Srivallabha. Youth in Ruhuna and Dakinadesa. The politics of Sri Lanka role in Parakramabahu's upbringing. Whilst he was still young, his eldest sister Mita was forcibly married to the cousin Manabharana, the son of Srivallabha of Ruhuna, against the wishes of Queen Ratnavali. Ratnavali was herself of the Kalinga clan of the royal family, and though she was the widow of a king of the Aryu branch of the royal family, she preferred to see her daughters married to a king from the Kalinga clan. During his time at Srivallabha's court, Parakramabahu met his future Mahesi, queen consort Lilavati, Srivallabha's daughter, who, following Parakramabahu's death, went on to rule the country in her own right. In 1132, following the death of Vikramabahu, Gajabahu II succeeded to the throne of Rajarata. Taking advantage of the new king's youth, the two monarchs of the Aryu branch of the royal family, Srivallabha and Kitishri Mega, tried unsuccessfully to seize Rajarata by force. Gajabahu established himself firmly as ruler and therefore nominally senior to the two Aryu kings, and neither Srivallabha nor Kitishri Mega would live to see the king of Rajarata dethroned. After the end of the Aryu-Kalinga civil war, Parakramabahu left Srivallabha's palace in Ruhuna and returned to Sankathali, the new capital of Dakinadesa, where he took up residence with his uncle. The Kulavamsa attributes the departure to his impatience and lack of stimulation in Ruhuna. It may also have been caused by Srivallabha's plans to place Manabharana of Ruhuna on the throne of Rajarata, which made Parakramabahu's position increasingly precarious in court. In Dakinadesa, on the other hand, he was well received by Kitishri Mega, who had no sons of his own, where he was essentially adopted. The Kulavamsa thereafter refers to Kiti as Parakramabahu's father. During his time at Dakinadesa, he studied important works of Chanakya and subjects such as grammar, literature, elephant riding, martial arts, song and dance. In Rajarata, sometime after his coming of age, the young prince left Dakinadesa in secrecy and set out for Gajabahu I's realm in Rajarata. Having met his allies at Badalatha, he visited the Senapati Sanka on the border between Rajarata and Dakinadesa. When Sanka tried to inform Kitishri Mega of the prince's journey, Parakramabahu had him killed. Sanka had been his guardian, and Kitishri Mega described him as mightiest vassal in my kingdom, making the murder all the more serious. Parakramabahu then seized Bodhigama and all of Sanka's property. He continued his journey, having evaded a force sent against him by Kitishri Mega, who feared complications with the court of Polonnaruwa, and travelled through the Malay region to Gajabahu's court. The reasons for Parakramabahu's behavior are considered uncertain, but according to the Kulavamsa, his journey was essentially one of reconnaissance. Although the three monarchs of the provinces were united, they all harbored the wish to govern the kingdom of Rajarata. At the time, however, it was suggested that none of them could take control of Rajarata, due to the limited resources available in the small provinces. Parakramabahu did not wish to believe this, and thus travelled to Rajarata to learn the conditions of the province himself. The reason provided for Kitishri Mega's efforts to bring the prince back to Dakinadesa represented as nothing more than concern for the well-being of his nephew, as well as concerns that Parakramabahu may reignite hostilities between the Arya and Kalinga factions. However, that the king of Dakshinadesa was tenderly attached to his nephew was regarded as fiction, and it is pointed out that the spirit in which the accounts of these conflicts are conceived is irreconcilable with the theory of untroubled relations between uncle and nephew. During his time in Gajabahu's court, the Parakramabahu did two things of significance. The first was to enmesh the court of Gajabahu in a web of espionage, and the other was to marry one of his sisters called Badavati to King Gajabahu. Through this marriage, Parakramabahu managed matters that Gajabahu too completely trusted him as much as he did the royal family. Nevertheless, he retained the entirety of Badavati's dowry for himself, and entered into secret negotiations with Gajabahu's general Gokana. Gajabahu eventually grew suspicious of Parakramabahu's activities, and Parakramabahu departed Rajarata in secrecy by night and returned to Dakshinadesa. In Dakshinadesa, Parakramabahu was reluctant to enter the capital Sankathali to see his uncle, King Kitishrimega, until persuaded by his mother Ratnavali to do so. Kitishrimega, however, died soon after Parakramabahu's return, and the Kulavamsa notes that the prince was not mastered by the agitation called forth by the grief at his father's death, perhaps a sign of lingering ill-feeling between the two. Parakramabahu was now king of Dakshinadesa. Government. Parakramabahu's objective for Dakshinadesa was to expand it so that it would surpass the greatness of other kingdoms in a short period of time. He started a huge program of construction and renovation, the remnants of which can still be seen in north-central province Sri Lanka today. It is mentioned of him as having restored an ancient causeway called the Kotabada over the Dajuruwa near modern Karanagala. The new king's personality was illustrated when the architects commissioned the project informed him that it was well nigh impossible to carry out, to which Parakramabahu replied that, "What is there in the world that cannot be carried out by people of energy?" He ordered the construction of canals and dams, and cleared a large area of forest around them for new fields. Most notably, he constructed the Parakrama Samudra, a giant reservoir from which a large swathe of territory derived its water supply. On islands in the middle of the reservoir, he constructed a palace and a stupa. He transformed the royal court, making it a hub of cultural activity, attracting young nobles skilled in various arts such as riding elephants, horses, swordsmanship, in the use of foreign tongues, and in dance and song. He reformed the government of Dakshinadesa, creating two ministries, the military affairs and the internal administration, to which he later added a third department, which oversaw the management of mines. Trade was an important component of Dakshinadase's income, since the island of Sri Lanka, given its geographical position, had always been at the junction of several major trade routes. Chinese silk was a significant import and was used in the consecration of statues and shrines. Pearls and gems constituted an important part of the island's exports, as did cinnamon and war elephants. Most trade was carried out through the main seaports of the principality, Kalpitiya, Hulavadha and Colombo. Preparation for war. Parakramabahu's army had a diverse ethnic makeup. Some of his officers were from the two grand old clans of Sri Lanka, the Maurya and the Lambakana, who had between them dominated Rajarata from Anuradhapura. A group of Tamil soldiers from near Karanagala also rallied to him, under a man styling himself the King of Malaya. By the time hostilities broke out between Dakshinadesa and Rajarata, the former's forces also included Vedas, Valala, and people from the lower castes not traditionally involved in martial activities. The Kulavamsa places the number of soldiers at somewhere around 100,000 people but the real figure was probably lower. Parakramabahu would have been able to field war elephants, cavalry, and siege engines, and his force represented a serious threat to Gajabahu's power in the north. Conquest of Rajarata. War with Gajabahu. Around 1150, Parakramabahu made his first move by seizing control of Malaya, strategically securing his eastern flank. He then moved his forces against various chieftains on the border of Rajarata. The final stage of this early campaign was the defeat of an army of Gajabahu himself, after which there was a brief ceasefire between the two sides. Hostilities resumed soon afterwards. Gajabahu had resorted to securing support from abroad, and by the time hostilities resumed between him and Parakramabahu, the army of Rajarata included nobles of heretical faith from abroad. Parakramabahu himself did not participate in the invasion of Rajarata, but was responsible for the overall strategy of the campaign, which was based on the writings of Kautilya. The forces of Dakshinadesa struck at the fortress of Malavalana near the mouth of the Kala, seizing it and occupying the western coast of Sri Lanka. The army then sailed up to the north and landed at a place called Mutukara and Mutukara near modern Manat, Sri Lanka. In the meantime, Gajabahu's senior general Gokana suffered several defeats in the vicinity of Kalavewa and was forced to appeal to the king of Rajarata for reinforcements. Despite receiving these and meeting with some success in Malaya, Gokana was again defeated by Parakramabahu's general Mahinda. A total that Gokana fled the battle scene, leaving behind his umbrella, an important status symbol in medieval Sri Lanka. The remnants of his force constructed a fortress in a jungle and took no further part in the war. By 1153, Parakramabahu's forces were in a position to take Polonnaruwa. Raka and a junior general named Suka inflicted another defeat on Gajabahu just 15 kilometers from the city, seizing the capital of Rajarata soon afterwards. The king and his two sons, Kolagama and Vikramabahu, were imprisoned. Parakramabahu was magnanimous in defeat, and laid out clear orders for the treatment of both the former king and the townspeople to his generals. If the heads of districts and the officers, grown insolent by the victory in fight, slay the king whom they have captured, that is not right. And if they plunder the town and ill-treat the people and become unbridled, that is likewise not right. The gaining of the royal dignity takes place for the welfare of the order and the people alone, but not for the purpose of slaying. Therefore thou must go there, hold the unbridled in check, take the king under thy protection and make the town secure. However, some members of Parakramabahu's army are known to have disregarded his commands and broken open house doors in Polonnaruwa, plundered goods and stole raiment and ornaments from the people of the city. The pillaging of Polonnaruwa was to have dire consequences for Parakramabahu. Angered by the actions of the forces from Dakshinadesa, the nobles and allies of Gajabahu, including his general Gokana, appealed to Minabharana of Ruhuna, who was at Sorabara, in the center of the country, for assistance. Despite having an alliance with Gajabahu, Minabharana had remained neutral in the war up till that point. Then, on the eve of Parakramabahu's victory, he stepped into the conflict and launched an invasion of Rajarata. War with Minabharana and Gajabahu. Parakramabahu sent his Senapathideva to restore order to Polonnaruwa, but he found himself in battle with Minabharana before he could reorganize his troops. The king of Ruhuna kept to his word and delivered Parakramabahu's forces a crushing blow, driving them from Polonnaruwa. For the Kalinga clan, however, The alliance with Manabharana backfired, as it was soon made clear that Manabharana intended to keep the city for himself. He put to death many of Gajabahu's senior officials, and imprisoned Gajabahu in a dungeon. Manabharana's mother, Shugala, and his wives were soon summoned from the south to live in Rajarata. The sacred relic of the tooth of the Buddha in the alms bowl relic, long kept in the south, were now returned under his aegis to the north. Gajabahu then appealed to Parakramabahu for assistance, and Parakramabahu ordered his troops to cut off grain supplies to Polonnaruwa and harass travelers on the roads between Ruhuna and Rajarata. As a result, all the people in the town with King Manabharana became weakened birds in a cage, with the sporadic attacks from Dakshinada's and forces slowly grinding down his power in the north. Manabharana left Polonnaruwa to attack a force commanded by Raka that had been wreaking havoc in western Rajarata. In his absence, Parakramabahu's forces seized Polonnaruwa, liberated Gajabahu too, and took into the possession the entirety of Manabharana's treasury. The disheartened king of Ruhuna returned to the south with his family and the sacred relics. Gajabahu, who had been set free, left Polonnaruwa before Parakramabahu arrived and decided to leave the country by ship. However, an attack by some of Gajabahu's followers on Parakramabahu's troops reignited hostilities between the two, and Parakramabahu sent his army to capture Gajabahu. By late 1153, after suffering a number of defeats, Gajabahu realized his capture was imminent, and appealed to the Sangha to intervene. They persuaded Parakramabahu that the ailing king no longer posed a threat, and that he should be allowed to live out the rest of his days in peace. Manabharana tried to woo the king back to the battle against Parakramabahu, but Gajabahu refused, having the words, "I have made over Rajarata" to Parakramabahu inscribed on a stone tablet to confirm his abdication in favor of Parakramabahu. Gajabahu moved to Gantale, where he died in the 22nd year after his coronation as king of Rajarata. Coronation and defeat of Manabharana. Parakramabahu was immediately crowned king of Rajarata, but the war was far from over. Manabharana struck again, sending his armies to the Mahareli River and attempting to cross into Rajarata via two fords. In the meantime, Narayana, a chieftain based at Anuradhapura, rose in rebellion, and Parakramabahu's hold in the north was again threatened. On this occasion, Parakramabahu decided to vanquish Manabharana once and for all. "Not even in Rahana will I permit King Manabharana, who is here, crushed in war, to find a hold." Raka was commanded to hold the fords at the Mahareli, while Parakramabahu himself attacked from Dakshinada into Ruhuna. Narayan's rebellion was suppressed by another force, leaving Raka, who had successfully held the fords at the Mahareli River, free to invade from the north. If Parakramabahu had hoped for a swift victory, it did not happen. Manabharana defeated Raka's army and drove them back to Rajarata. Parakramabahu found himself facing dissension within his own ranks and the defeat of his forces in Malaya. Manabharana even recaptured Polonnaruwa, and with it most of Rajarata. Despite this, Parakramabahu persevered with the offensive, withdrawing from his southern campaign and concentrating his forces in the north. Manabharana once again found himself besieged in Polonnaruwa. Both sides were exhausted by the incessant warfare of the preceding years, and Manabharana eventually fled the city for Ruhuna. His forces were overtaken at the Mahareli River by Parakramabahu's army and annihilated. The king returned to the south in time to pass away from a combination of disease and exhaustion. Parakramabahu was finally the unquestioned lord of the entire island of Sri Lanka, even though it had been at the cost of around 5 years of incessant warfare. In years to come, the king himself was to regard this war as one of the most significant events of his reign, mentioning it in several of his edicts carved on stone, such as the one near Devangala. He celebrated by summoning Manabhrani's son to Polonnaruwa and concluding a peace with him, followed by a lavish coronation ceremony.